The judge ordered me to remove my military medal. The words echoed through the courtroom like a slap. Every conversation stopped. Chairs creaked. Even the court reporter looked up from the keyboard. My fingers instinctively touched the metal pinned to my jacket. I had earned it years earlier in a place where fear was measured in heartbeats and survival depended on the people standing beside you. It wasn't decoration. It was a reminder of those who never made it home. Across the aisle, my sister-in-law couldn't hide the smile spreading across her face. She leaned back with folded arms, already convinced she had won. Her lawyer looked just as pleased. I said nothing. Silence had carried me through far worse than a courtroom. The judge repeated the order, insisting the medal was an attempt to manipulate the court. A few people nodded. Others whispered. I slowly unpinned it, placed it carefully on the defense table, and met my sister-in-law's eyes without anger. She mistook my calm for surrender. What none of them knew was that a sealed military document had just arrived in the courthouse minutes earlier. Before the day ended, that single document wouldn't just unravel her carefully planned case, it would expose a conflict of interest so devastating that the judge's own reputation would collapse before everyone's eyes. My name is Daniel Carter, and for 22 years I wore the uniform of my country with quiet pride. I wasn't the loudest soldier, the fastest to celebrate, or the first to tell stories about my service. I simply believed that integrity spoke louder than medals ever could. After retiring from the military, I returned to my hometown hoping for something I had missed during countless deployments, a peaceful life surrounded by family. Instead, I walked into battles that required no battlefield. My older brother, Michael, had passed away unexpectedly 2 years earlier, leaving behind a successful family business. In his will, he divided his shares equally between me and his wife, Vanessa, my sister-in-law. At first, I assumed we would honor his wishes together. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Vanessa never shouted. She smiled. She complimented me in public and questioned me in private. She slowly convinced relatives that I was emotionally unstable, obsessed with my military past, and incapable of making sound business decisions. Every family gathering became another opportunity for whispered conversations that conveniently stopped whenever I entered the room. I noticed the change, but I refused to fight rumors with louder rumors. Years in uniform had taught me that people reveal themselves when you stop interrupting them. Most relatives believed her because she was charming, confident, and always appeared prepared. I became the quiet veteran sitting at the edge of the table while everyone assumed my silence meant weakness. They underestimated me because I never argued. They mistook patience for fear. What none of them understood was that military service had trained me to observe before acting, to collect facts before making a move, and to wait until the right moment instead of chasing quick victories. By the time Vanessa dragged me into court to strip away my inheritance, she believed she had already written the ending. She didn't realize I had been carefully preserving every piece of the truth, waiting for the one moment when it would become impossible for anyone, including the judge, to ignore it. The lawsuit didn't begin with a dramatic accusation. It started with small, carefully calculated moments that were easy to dismiss on their own but impossible to ignore when placed together. Vanessa insisted every business meeting be held without notifying me until the last minute. If I arrived, she would pause mid-conversation, smile politely, and say, "We were just finishing anyway." The other partners would avoid my eyes, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Family dinners became another stage. She would ask about my military service with a warm smile, then quietly add, "It's hard for Daniel to let go of the past." A few relatives would chuckle politely. Others exchanged quick glances before changing the subject. No one realized she wasn't making conversation. She was shaping an opinion. When my brother's old office was renovated, every family photograph remained on the wall except the one showing him standing beside me. After my final deployment, Vanessa claimed it had been damaged during storage. Weeks later, I found it tucked inside a cabinet. Untouched, its frame still intact, I placed it back on the shelf without saying a word. At board meetings, she often corrected me before I finished speaking, apologizing with practiced kindness. "Daniel means well," she'd say softly. "But business decisions are different from military decisions." People nodded. I simply took notes. Every insult was delivered with perfect timing, never loud enough to sound cruel, never obvious enough for anyone to challenge. Even inside the courthouse, the pattern continued. Her lawyer greeted everyone except me. Vanessa walked past my seat without acknowledging my presence, though I caught the brief satisfaction in her expression. She believed isolation would make me doubt myself. Instead, it reminded me of patrols where silence often revealed more than conversation ever could. So I watched. I noticed the folded note the judge's clerk quietly handed to Vanessa's attorney before the hearing began. I noticed the judge greeting that same attorney with unusual familiarity. None of it proved anything, but experience had taught me that the smallest details often pointed toward the biggest truths, and I had already begun connecting them long before anyone realized. I was paying attention. The hearing moved exactly the way Vanessa had expected. Her attorney questioned my judgment, suggesting that years of military service had made me overly suspicious and emotionally attached to the past. Every objection my lawyer raised was dismissed with surprising speed. The balance in the courtroom felt uneven, but I refused to let frustration show on my face. Then the judge ordered me to remove my medal. For a brief moment, I considered arguing, not because the medal would change the outcome of the case, but because of what it represented. I remembered the men and women who had stood beside me during impossible days, and those who never came home. The medal belonged to all of them. Still, I quietly unpinned it and placed it on the table. That decision changed everything. As I looked around the courtroom, I realized something important. Vanessa wasn't interested in winning fairly. She wanted to humiliate me in public, to make the court see me as a man hiding behind a uniform instead of someone standing on evidence. The judge, whether intentionally or not, had allowed that narrative to grow. In that instant, I stopped worrying about defending my reputation. I focused on revealing the truth. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "The courier just arrived." Without another word, he slid a sealed envelope across the table. I recognized the military insignia immediately. It was the certified response we had requested. Weeks earlier, after discovering irregularities in documents Vanessa had submitted to support her claims, we had waited for it until the very last moment. The judge glanced at the envelope with visible impatience, clearly expecting another routine filing. He was mistaken. Inside was official documentation confirming that one of the key records used against me had been altered after it left military archives, along with the chain of custody showing exactly when and by whom it had been accessed. For the first time that day, Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. The courtroom fell completely silent. The case was no longer about my medal. It was about the truth, and someone in that courtroom had far more to lose than I did. People often imagine revenge as something loud, raised voices, dramatic confrontations, or impulsive decisions made in anger. My experience had taught me the opposite. In the military, rushing toward conclusions could cost lives. The safest plan was usually the quietest one. Built on patience, verified facts, and disciplined timing, that mindset stayed with me long after I hung up my uniform. The moment Vanessa filed her lawsuit, I stopped reacting emotionally and started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting notice, every financial statement, and every signed record was copied, dated, and organized in chronological order. My lawyer, a former federal prosecutor known for his attention to detail, encouraged the approach. He often reminded me that facts become powerful only when they are impossible to dispute. Together, we reviewed months of paperwork. A pattern slowly emerged. Several documents Vanessa had submitted contained small inconsistencies. Dates didn't match archived records. Signatures appeared authentic, yet the formatting differed from the originals. On their own, the discrepancies looked insignificant. Together, they suggested that someone had altered official copies after they had been issued. Instead of accusing anyone, we quietly requested certified records directly from the military archives and the business registry. Every request followed the proper legal process, leaving a clear paper trail that no one could question later. We also avoided discussing our strategy outside confidential meetings. While Vanessa confidently gave interviews to local reporters and hinted that the lawsuit would expose hidden truths, we said nothing. Her public confidence encouraged her to reveal more than she intended. Every interview added another statement that could later be compared with the official evidence. By the week of the hearing, our files were complete. We weren't relying on opinions, emotional speeches, or sympathy. We were relying on authenticated records, verified timelines, and legally certified documents from independent institutions. I didn't want the courtroom to believe my version of events. I wanted the evidence to speak so clearly that no reasonable person could ignore it. Sometimes the strongest move isn't proving someone wrong. It's giving them enough certainty to expose themselves before the truth quietly closes every escape they thought they had. My lawyer rose without a trace of urgency, carrying the sealed envelope, as though it contained nothing more than another routine filing. The room remained quiet, but every eye followed him. He handed the certified documents to the judge. For several seconds, the only sound was the turning of paper. The judge's expression slowly changed. His confidence faded into hesitation. He reread one page, then another, before adjusting his glasses and looking toward Vanessa's attorney. "Counsel," he said evenly, "would you care to explain this?" No one answered. The document showed that the military record used to question my credibility had been accessed after its original certification date. The audit trail identified the request, the unauthorized alteration, and the official archive that rejected the modified version. Attached to it was another certified report comparing the original file with the one submitted to the court. The differences were impossible to dismiss as simple clerical mistakes. Vanessa's attorney quickly flipped through his own copy, his face losing color with every page. Then my lawyer requested permission to introduce one final exhibit. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply an email. Weeks earlier, Vanessa had instructed an assistant to obtain a cleaner version of my service record before the lawsuit moved forward. She apparently believed the message had been deleted. It hadn't. The email had been preserved on the company's secure server under its automatic retention policy and legally obtained during discovery. A heavy silence settled across the courtroom. The judge looked from the documents to Vanessa, then back to the email. The confident smile she had worn all morning disappeared completely. For the first time since the hearing began, she had nothing to say. The judge recessed the proceedings and ordered an immediate review of the evidence, including the circumstances surrounding the altered records. He also disclosed on the record that he had failed to recognize a professional connection between himself and Vanessa's attorney that should have been disclosed. Before the case began, no one celebrated. I quietly picked up my military medal, pinned it back onto my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom with the same calm I had carried into it. This time, the whispers followed someone else. By the following morning, the courtroom drama was no longer just another family dispute. Local newspapers focused less on the inheritance case and more on the questions surrounding the altered evidence and the judge's undisclosed professional relationship with Vanessa's attorney. Within days, the Judicial Oversight Committee announced a formal review, and the case was reassigned to a different judge to preserve public confidence in the legal process. Vanessa's carefully crafted image unraveled faster than I expected. The relatives who had once avoided sitting beside me suddenly remembered conversations they claimed had never felt quite right. Some apologized sincerely. Others offered excuses instead of accountability. I accepted the honest apologies and quietly ignored the excuses. Trust, once broken, isn't rebuilt with convenient words. Her attorney withdrew from representing her as investigations, expanded into how the disputed documents had reached the courtroom. Business partners who had once followed Vanessa without question began requesting independent audits of company records. They weren't choosing sides anymore. They were choosing transparency. As for me, nothing about my daily routine changed. I still woke before sunrise. I still visited my brother's grave every month. I still wore my medal only on occasions where it truly belonged, not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of duty and sacrifice. The greatest reward wasn't reclaiming my reputation. It was realizing I had never truly lost it. People's opinions had changed because the truth became visible, not because I shouted louder than anyone else. Looking back, I understand why this story matters. Many people believe justice belongs to whoever speaks the loudest or has the most influence. But lasting justice often arrives quietly, carried by patience, preparation, and facts that refuse to disappear. If you allow anger to control your decisions, you may win an argument and lose your integrity. If you let evidence speak with calm confidence, you may lose time, but you give the truth a chance to outlast every lie. In the end, the medal on my jacket never proved who I was. My actions did. A year has passed since that day in court, and people still ask whether I feel vindicated. The truth is, vindication wasn't the lesson I carried away. Peace was. The inheritance case eventually ended in my favor after the new judge reviewed every piece of evidence independently. Vanessa was held responsible for submitting altered records, and the business was placed under professional management until the legal matters were resolved. I accepted my rightful share, but instead of treating it as a prize, I used part of it to establish a scholarship in my brother, Michael's name for the children of military families. It felt like the kind of decision he would have respected. As for the medal, it now rests in a simple wooden display case in my study. I don't look at it every day. I don't need to. The values it represents, honor, patience, and responsibility, have become part of how I choose to live. The judge eventually retired after the ethics investigation concluded. I never celebrated his downfall. A damaged reputation is a heavy burden, and I understood better than most how a single decision can define an entire career. Justice had already done what anger never could. I also stopped expecting everyone to understand my silence. Some people confuse quietness with weakness because they've never witnessed disciplined restraint. But I've learned that strength isn't measured by how loudly you defend yourself. It's measured by whether you can remain true to your principles when every shortcut promises a faster victory. When I visit my brother's grave now, I no longer feel the weight of unfinished business. I tell him about the scholarship, about the young families it helps, and about how the truth finally found its place. In those quiet moments, I feel closer to him than I have in years. If this journey taught me anything, it's that revenge driven by anger burns out quickly, but justice built on truth leaves a legacy no lie can erase. I walked into that courtroom wearing a medal. I walked out carrying something far more valuable, the certainty that integrity will always outlast power, and truth never needs to raise its voice to be heard.